Hello, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar event, brought to you courtesy of the SPE P&A Technical Section and also the SPE Well Integrity Technical Section. My name's Alex Lucas, the Asia Pacific representative of the SPE P&A Technical Section, and I'm currently based here in the wonderful city of Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, where I work as a well engineering specialist focused on P&A, legacy well integrity, and CCS. I'm very pleased to be joined here today by my distinguished co-host, Pierre-Edouard Vincent, joining us from Paris.
Hello,
Please say
everyone.
hello, Pierre-Edouard. Give a
Hello,
wave.
everyone.
Good to have you here. So Pierre-Edouard and I will be your hosts and moderators today. The event will last approximately 60 minutes, but we won't have a hard stop. We encourage you to ask questions throughout, which we'll use to fuel our discussions. Please also feel free to use the chat function to ask questions. Most of you will be joining via LinkedIn, but if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can also try the alternative via the YouTube link provided on the LinkedIn page. This event will be recorded and available on demand via our various platforms. But before we get started, it's of course my duty as an SPE representative to give a quick plug for the Society and encourage any of you out there that are not currently members to please consider joining the SPE and access the many benefits of being a member and also our technical sections for P&A and well integrity, both available through SPE Connect and LinkedIn. And a few little updates from us first. Pierre-Edouard, if you could introduce
Yeah,
a couple of events that
yeah,
you'd like to
absolutely.
share with the audience.
First and foremost, is one of the big yearly meetings will happen in a few days for a few who have the chance to travel. So that's the annual technical conference and exhibition in Houston, one of the big SP events. So yeah, feel free to attend if you can. And then relevant to our business in the coming weeks, there will be the SP Well Integrity Workshop being held again in Holland. That's 25 AWEL. It'll be the 11th and 12th of November, and the whole team is very busy preparing what should be an interesting content again this year. It will be followed, incidentally, by another event on the 13th and 14th of November in Utrecht, also in the Netherlands, an event co-organized by TNO, SODM, and NIOS on methane emissions monitoring for offshore wells. So quite in line with our discussion. I look forward to this.
Great, that should be interesting, Pierre-Edouard. Thanks. And for those of you in the Asia Pacific region, I'd also like to highlight the SPE Asia Pacific Decommissioning and Well P&A Symposium, which is taking place next month, the 11th and 12th of November in Perth, Australia. This is really a first-class event for well P&A practitioners and is really the key event in the Asia Pacific region. So I'd really like to encourage those of you in Asia Pac to try to attend if you can. Okay, so with all the formalities out of the way, it's time to get down to the main event of our webinar today, entitled Abandonment, Zero Leaks Forever. So please note carefully the title, everyone, and in particular that there's a question mark after the word forever. And this highlights that the intent of today's webinar is to generate some deliberation and debate over whether there is a place for more pragmatism over perfection in well abandonment. As well abandonment and well integrity practitioners, we've always intended to try to do the right thing and try to deliver zero leaks to the environment, even when this target is not always explicitly stated in regulatory guidelines and standards, such as NORSOC D10 and OEUK. Indeed, it's often implicitly assumed by many, including regulators and the general public, that this is what we're expected and required to deliver. However, is the target of zero leaks forever really realistic, particularly given what we know about downhole environments and our ability to design and install barriers that will perform perfectly for geological timeframes? Is it really sensible to strive for perfection? Or is a balance of risk approach, such as low as reasonably practical methodology, more appropriate? Clearly, this is quite a controversial subject, but certainly a debate that arises time and time again in our industry. So we thought it would make the perfect topic for a presentation and panel discussion today. And so we've enlisted the help of the perfect presenter, an expert to try to help us to get to grips with the complex subject. So it gives me great pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce to you Ruth Thomas of WellSafe Solutions. Say hello, Ruth.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me.
Most welcome. So Ruth will start the discussion today by sharing her presentation, Zero Leaks Forever. Is there a place for pragmatism over perfection in well abandonment? Ruth is a geoscientist with 24 years of experience delivering subsurface projects for operators such as CNR International, Apache, Talisman Energy, and Repsol Sinopec. She holds a first-class Bachelor of Engineering degree in Industrial Geology and a Master of Science in Geology. And after earning her Master of Science in Decommissioning, she clearly likes to collect Masters of Science, where she got that one from the University of Aberdeen in 2022. She joined WellSafe Solutions shortly after as their subsurface manager, responsible for the company's global subsurface portfolio. Ruth is a strong advocate for the role of geoscience in cost-effective well abandonment, and she actively promotes technical excellence and industry best practice through regular regulator and industry engagement, conference presentations, and training initiatives. She's an active board member of the SPE P&A technical section and co-founder and current chair of the Offshore Energies UK Geoscience Excellence in Decommissioning workshop. But before I ask Ruth to get the debate going, with her presentation, I should also take a moment to introduce one of our other panelists. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Elvin Mizaev, who joins us from Stavanger in Norway. Give everyone a wave there, Elvin, if you don't mind.
Yep. Hello, everyone.
Say hello. There you are.
Thank you for having me as well.
Great. You're most welcome. Thanks for joining. Elvin is a PhD candidate at the University of Stavanger, researching fluid migration processes at offshore well sites. He holds a Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Petroleum Engineering from Azerbaijan State Oil and Industry University and King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals, respectively. His Master of Science thesis examined the impacts of injection rate, pore pressure, and rock permeability on wormhole generation during CO2 sequestration in limestone aquifers, leading to several peer-reviewed publications. Elvin's doctoral research addresses well integrity, CO2 storage, and pathways for a safe offshore energy transition, with particular focus on developing evidence-based recommendations for regulatory authorities and operating companies on drilling and plug and abandonment strategies to mitigate well-associated seeps. So it's great to have you with us, Elvin, and great to have someone at the cutting edge of research into the very sorts of issues that we'll discuss today. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think you're in for a bit of a treat today, starting with what I'm sure will be a very stimulating presentation from Ruth. So please sit back and enjoy learning about whether there's a place for pragmatism over perfection in well abandonment. And without further ado, Ruth, I'll hand over to you. Please take it away.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for that lovely introduction. And I welcome lots of nice questions regarding this quite controversial topics. And it's a real pleasure to be here today to pose that question. Zero leaks forever. Is there a place for pragmatism over perfection when it comes to well abandonment? So what we'll cover over the next 25 minutes probably will be a little bit of a look at leaks on a global scale. We'll have a look at the regulatory expectations surrounding leakage. And we'll consider a case study example of the options for isolating shallow biogenic gas zones in the central North Sea as a means to examine the role of leak characterization and the calculation of societal cost when it comes to underpinning a more pragmatic abandonment solution. But what does that phrase, zero leaks forever, even mean? And as Alex alluded to, is it realistic or even achievable? Because there is one inconvenient truth. All rocks leak a little bit or a lot. And Google provides some beautiful images of leakages and seeps and weeps. For example, this multi-beam sonar image of methane seep from the Gulf of America. And of course, we have this methane bubble flow emerging from the seafloor offshore Virginia. And a little bit closer to home, near where I grew up on the south coast of England in Dorset, near a place called Osmington Mills, which is due west of the Witch Farm oil field. And there's a wonderful pub and eatery here, by the way, should anyone ever wish to visit. And I would like to think that all of those cruise ships in the bay there had their visitors actually going out onto the beach and seeing the oil seeping out of the Bencliffe Grit. But of course, it's these kind of onshore seeps and weeps which first alerted us to the existence of black gold. And of course, a reason why a lot of us are sat here today and having this discussion. But there are very good reasons to be conscious of the impact of leaking hydrocarbons, and in particular methane. It is our duty, of course, to minimize our impact on climate change, but we will return to this theme a little bit later on. So what is the regulatory context surrounding leakage? And I'd like to start by examining the context surrounding carbon capture and storage, CCS, which employs a cumulative benefit mindset. And success is measured by the global total amount of CO2 which is removed from the atmosphere and stored underground. And the legislation and guidance for CCS asks us to quantify significant versus insignificant leak risk. And so my interpretation is that this has some level of leak acceptance. And obviously there is some legacy well leakage risk which we are asked to quantify. So long as the cumulative benefit outweighs the cumulative negative impacts, we are in a good place. But when it comes to well abandonment, legislation across the globe is largely prescriptive in mandating absolute containment. And here is a summary of some of the terminology used in some of the legislation around the globe, which can include well integrity is ensured during the well's lifetime, no flow, prevent flow, no flow escaping from the wellbore. And of course, this kind of zero leaks forever mindset is realized through a conservative multi-level plugin strategy which can drive cost escalation and lead to project deferment. And on the right-hand side, we see a proposed abandonment of a typical well with multiple barriers placed regardless of the type of fluids to be contained. And this has minimal subsurface input in terms of its derivation from an isolation point of view. But the sentiment is shifting towards a regulatory landscape which does encourage a more risk-based approach to abandonment, placing emphasis on the use of data and specific engineering and subsurface studies to reduce the leak risk to as low as reasonably practicable, or ALAP. And of course, that's how it's reflected in our own legislation and guidance. And on the right-hand side, we see a proposed abandonment schematic, which has a much reduced abandonment scope. But are we going far enough? We should absolutely be throwing money at a situation where we have large-scale thermogenic leakage or a serious loss of containment. But what about the more subtle cases? For example, shallow biogenic gas leakage. And dare I ask, can there ever be an acceptable leak rate or leak risk when it comes to hydrocarbons? So we're going to consider a case study example of the isolation options for shallow biogenic gas formations in the central North Sea basin of the UK continental shelf. So where does biogenic gas actually reside in the sediments? Well, on the right-hand side, we can see a map of the central North Sea, and the North Sea basin is peppered with gas escape features called pockmarks, thanks to the presence of sandstones and siltstones some 300 to 700 meters beneath the seabed, which are attributed to the early Pleistocene, or more commonly known as the sheet basin or claret sands, and the crenular interval. And where shallow gas accumulations reside inside these glacier marine sediments, they do represent drilling hazards, and that's attested to by several blowouts which have occurred over the years as illustrated on the right-hand side. And one such example is well 224B4, which blew out in 1990 when the high seas driller entered a gas-bearing sandstone some 360 meters beneath the seabed. And the resultant blowout, which created a crater which is some 20 meters deep by 70 meters wide, has been responsible for emplacing a vast quantity of methane into the water column ever since. And of course, this well remains unabandoned and a leak point to this day. So the case study is going to consider the isolation options when we were planning an abandonment of a nearby platform with 12 wells. And all of the wells are exhibiting sustained annular pressure, SAP, up to about 150 psi, which is present from the sea annulus. And the architecture is illustrated and summarized on the right-hand side. And what we believe is happening is that because of a strung out cement inside the sea annular space, we have leakage of biogenic gas up through the annulus and to the platform. And we also believe that this zone may be affected by something called methanogenesis, which is the reinvigoration of a biogenic system due to the platform heating up the actual overburden sediments within the sort of well stock area. And this is generating gas and reinvigorating those natural bugs that are in place. So we must deal with operational pressures and gas safely. However, there is some debate over whether or not we need to sufficiently isolate biogenic gas, which is already in communication with the seabed. And so this has really been driving the narrative behind a lot of the conversation in this presentation in terms of an actual abandonment liability. So what are the options for isolating what I would coin as chronic low-level biogenic gas leakage? Well, we could set a conventional barrier. That's option number one. This is a milled window approach. It's fully verified and can be considered to be pressure containing. Option number two is to perform a perforate and squeeze barrier. This is considered to be a best endeavors case because the annular space in terms of the cement may remain unverified. And option three is simply an environmental barrier, which will purely be for the isolation of annular contaminants only. But before we actually get on to the isolation of any shallow zones, we must abandon the reservoir. And assuming all ABN 0 suspension activities have been completed, we will go through the operational steps, which are summarized on the left-hand side in this bar chart, with operational steps on the x-axis and duration in days on the y-axis. So we will recover the tree and run the drilling BOP and riser, recover the tubing and the hanger, run a CBL, and of course set a verified abandonment barrier just above the reservoir to isolate the main reservoir. Total time per well is about 6 days. Across the 12 wells, that's about £8.6 million. But moving on to the options for the shallow biogenic gas. So option number one, the conventional barrier. Again, we have the operational steps summarized. We will cut and recover the 9 5/8" casing just beneath the biogenic gas zone. We will set a bridge plug and displace the well to milling fluids. We'll run in hole with a milling assembly and under-ream a window and mill a window in order to place a rock-to-rock cement barrier just above the zone to be isolated. Of course, this will then have to be verified. We will then set an environmental barrier, very shallow in the well, to contain the OBM, oil-based mud, which is present in the sea annulus. So you can see here the total time per well just for this operation is double that of the reservoir abandonment. And across the 12 wells, we're looking at a cost of roughly £20 million. And I should note this is a level 4 cost estimate. So on to option number two, the perforate and squeeze barrier. We'd start again by cutting and recovering the 9 5/8" casing just beneath the biogenic gas zone. We would then set a bridge plug and run it on drill pipe to perform an inflow test. So we would perforate into the zone we were looking to isolate. Now, knowledge is power. And so an inflow test is an opportunity to collect a pressure data point, which could potentially de-risk the operations or even get rid of the isolation requirement entirely, but we probably only need to do this on the first well. We would then run in hole with a squeeze packer we would recommend using the gator perforating tool to perforate the 13 3/8 inch casing just above the gas zone, and then we would attempt to circulate out the sea annulus. Of course, we would monitor the sea annular pressure, and this may require to be done a couple of times because we're not really sure where the top of our strung out cement is. But it also means that this is a slightly extended operation potentially. We would then squeeze cement into the perforations, into the annular space, and lay off an internal cement barrier. But we can't really verify the base of this annular space. And so this is the reason why this is called a best endeavours case. Across the 12 wells, we're looking at about nearly 7 days per well and just over £11 million in total cost. And of course, option number 3 is the environmental barrier. We would cut and recover only a very short amount of the 9 5/8 inch casing before placing an environmental barrier in the well and squeezing cement into that sea annular space, trying to circulate out some of the OBM. But we are very much aware that this is an operation to purely give us some containment of that OBM within the sea annulus. And as such, we've reduced the time per well to about 3.4 days and a cost of about £6.2 million. So how do options 1, 2, and 3 compare? We will assess them against the criteria for legislation. Does the option comply? Technical, how complex is the option and what is the chance of successfully executing it? Environment, what is the resource burden and is there a residual leak risk of biogenic gas? And of course, we'll look at the cost. We'll compare this on a simple traffic light system, but we are assuming that all options are technically possible and can be executed safely. And so we are eliminating those health and safety risks in terms of the choice of option. So option 1, the conventional barrier. It's a fully lateral barrier. It complies with the regulation and the guidance completely. However, we do have a low chance or a lower chance of successfully executing it. We need sufficient weight and torque to be able to mill. We need to be able to deal with swarf and swarf pack-offs. And largely this option determines the type of P&A unit we can use, with the likelihood of being able to use a hydraulic workover unit diminished. And of course, at these shallow depths, we have a very short response time should anything go wrong. However, in terms of the environmental aspect, if we are successful, we will have placed a gas-type pressure-containing barrier despite the extended operations in terms of resource usage. But it comes at a cost at just over £20 million. Option 2, the perforate and squeeze barrier. It is not a fully verified lateral barrier. However, it could be argued that it complies with the spirit of the ALARP principle. We have a good chance of successfully executing it. The one risk really is establishing that communication and circulation pathway in the sea annular space, which may impact the quality of the annular barrier. And simpler operations uses less resources than option 1. However, we do have a risk of future migration and therefore leakage of shallow biogenic gas in the future. But it comes in at nearly £9 million less expensive than option 1. Option 3, the environmental barrier. It is purely for OBM containment in the sea annular space. We have an excellent chance of successfully deploying it. It's simple operations and proven technology. However, it does leave us with a much increased likelihood of gas migration and potentially leakage in the future. But it has simpler operations and therefore less of a resource burden than options 1 and 2. And of course, it comes in at nearly £5 million less than option 2. So we have a trade-off. Options 2 and 3 leave us with a potential risk of future leakage. And therefore, I come back to that question. Is that acceptable when we are talking about methane gas? So with the health and safety risks mitigated, what is the important metric left to consider when it comes to which option to choose? Well, it's the cost to society of releasing methane into the atmosphere. So why is that a problem? Well, methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than CO2 in the short term, with a global warming potential some 84 to 87 times that of CO2 over 20 years, and about 30 times that over 100 years. And methane emissions are standardized to CO2 equivalent. And in order to do that, the tonnage of methane is multiplied by a carbon value, which is determined by the UK government to be the cost of reducing emissions to meet the UK's climate goals. This is what it costs to cut emissions. It's not a damage cost, which is how it tends to be dealt with in the United States, for example. So we're going to consider a leakage rate of 10 tonnes per year across a 20-year period. And in total, this would be 200 tonnes of methane. This is equated to a total CO2 equivalent by multiplying it by that global warming potential. I've used 87 in this instance. And then we need to multiply that figure again by the carbon value. And in 2025, DESNZ, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, determined that that was £287 per tonne of CO2 equivalent, leaving us with a societal cost of this 200 tonne of methane emission at £5 million. So just to give you a flavour of how you actually calculate societal cost. But how do we calculate well leak rate? Well, first we need to characterize what leaks and how. So leaks tend to fall into two buckets, excuse the pun, formation leaks and well leaks, or natural and anthropogenic. And the transport of fluids through marine sediments is primarily governed by pressure differentials and permeability contrasts. However, intact caprock can generally considered to be capillary sealing, unless, of course, it's been altered through natural processes or extractive activities. And the migration of gas tends to be through faulted or fractured zones. It may migrate along permeable carrier beds before a proportion of that natural gas escapes to the seabed. When it comes to well leaks, it tends to fall under the banner of well integrity issues and can include cement or casing deformation or failures. And of course, we can induce near wellbore formation damage as a result of drilling and construction related activities. But how do leaks evolve over time? Well, natural leakage tends to be emitted through multiple bubble streams across a wide areal extent. However, as the accumulation depletes, we may see a reduction in the bubble diameter and the leak rate, and that is evidenced from surveys. And we'll hear later on from Elvin how this is actually manifesting itself in real data. In terms of well leaks, they tend to be less frequent bubbles. The bubble streams are more locally sourced, of course, around well heads or former well locations. However, as the barriers degrade or pressure recharge occurs in the reservoirs, the leak rate may increase until we have eventual wellbore collapse and potentially a drop-off of the leak rate. And there is numerous publications on leak rates from both natural and anthropogenic sources, and that's summarized in the right-hand side in terms of the North Sea Basin. And there's plenty of literature should you wish to review it. But in summary, leakage tends to basically be very highly variable, dependent upon the source. And we can see here the leak magnitude going from small to very large, dependent upon the natural or anthropogenic nature of it. It's also dependent upon the geological setting, the well design, construction and abandonment history, and of course the proximity of the wells to shallow gas accumulations. And there is some evidence to suggest that if you are drilling near shallow gas accumulations, you will have potentially more migration of gas, obviously. And wells spud before 2010, according to the literature, are more likely to leak. And of course, this is probably related to cementing practices after the Macondo incident. But in order to have a little bit more of a quantitative understanding of leakage rate and therefore risk, there are companies developing methods and software to allow us to actually model our leak rates probabilistically. And there are two examples here, net zero geosystems and cross-flow analytics. And this allows our leakage rates to be looked at in terms of, what impacts their rate in terms of failure mechanisms within our wells and our formations, what leakage pathways are available, what kind of cross-flow volumes are occurring, and also we can test our chosen P&A strategy on our leak characteristics. And of course, this has come about through the sort of carbon capture and storage requirement as well as abandonment. But we need to remember how much methane is actually released into the atmosphere. And this is a key metric of any modeling. Because inconvenient truth number 2, not all leaks are delivered to the atmosphere. And research and a study by the University of Stavanger, who conducted fate modeling of methane leakages from abandoned wells on the Norwegian continental shelf, determined that due to seasonal thermocline activity, between 95 and 99% of the released methane was being dissolved into the water column. And of course, this reduces massively that diffusive exchange capability, which is occurring between the hydrosphere and the atmosphere. And so actually characterizing the receiving environment of a leak is absolutely critical when it comes to understanding the societal impact of leakage. So how might we estimate the cost to society in our case study example? Well, we're looking here at the unmitigated potential leak rate from our 12 wells. And there are some assumptions here, which I have detailed. And I'd really like to extend my thanks to my colleague, Dave Roberts, who is our wells TA, for his help in terms of running a simplistic exercise for predicting the flow rate of methane in the case study example. And we have estimated that over the 12 wells, it is likely that the emission of methane will start at around 30 tonnes per well per year. And we've applied a very simple exponential decline of 10% per year to simulate how the accumulation may deplete over the years. And it will reach a rate of 0 after 60 years. And this is a total emission of methane of 3,235 tonnes. And just to put it into a little bit of context, the average dairy cow emits 0.1 of a tonne of CO2 of methane per cow per year, and so at this unmitigated level, we're looking at about 300 cows worth of methane each year, which is obviously exponentially declining. Just to put it into a little bit of context. We're going to assume in this case study example, because we are in the North Sea and we have a water column above us, that we are going to be dissolving 90% of that methane into the water column. This is a little bit conservative in comparison to the literature, which states between 95 and 99%. However, with multiple wells potentially emitting methane, we feel that it's a reasonable number. The dissolution power of the water column may have been reduced due to the load it's carrying. This equates to a total CO2 equivalent when we use that global warming potential number of 87 to just over 28,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. And when we multiply that by the carbon value, that equates to a societal cost of just over £8 million for this example of these 12 wells. So what is the value of this information? And how does it help us choose an appropriate option when it comes to isolating our biogenic gas zones? Well, I would like to start really by touching on the cost-benefit analysis, which allows us to underpin our abandonment choice. And everyone has heard of the ALART principle, so I just wanted to touch on it really and sort of explain what it is in this context. So essentially, the ALART principle aims to reduce the risks to a level which is as low as reasonably practicable through the systematic identification of hazards and reasonable mitigation measures which are proportional to the risk you're trying to reduce. And you need to consider factors such as technological feasibility, time constraints, and of course, cost. And using a cost-benefit analysis such as this can mean that some mitigations are excluded if it can be proven that their cost breaches a grossly disproportional threshold where you only have that minor incremental reduction in risk. And that's what this seesaw diagram is trying to illustrate. The resultant decision-making framework is supported by qualitative and quantitative risk assessment, stakeholder engagement, and of course, continual monitoring throughout the abandonment process. So in our example, the question is, does the cost of the isolation option for biogenic gas leakage remain beneath a grossly disproportional threshold? Well, let's have a look. Option number 1. We are spending over £12 million more than the societal cost which has been calculated for this potential leakage. I would argue this does bust a grossly disproportional level in terms of cost and benefit. Option number 2, the perforate and squeeze barrier. We are spending a modest £3 million more than the societal cost. I would argue this is a reasonable balance between benefit and the cost of the mitigation measure, but it does leave us with a small residual leak risk. And of course, the environmental barrier is cheaper, much cheaper. It's coming in at nearly £2 million less than the societal cost. However, we do have a very, very strong chance that we will not get any mitigation of migration of gas in the future. And so cutting it down to these two options, in my professional opinion, I believe that a pragmatic option when it comes to striking a balance between achieving a level of risk reduction without that disproportionate cost. In this instance, with this particular setup of wells and the leakage rate we have estimated, I believe that option 2, the perforate and squeeze barrier, is probably the more balanced approach in this instance. So, should leak rate modelling form part of the decommissioning planning process as a means to deliver cost-effective well abandonment? Well, I absolutely believe it should. And on the left-hand side, we can see the OEUK decommissioning work breakdown structure summarised. And I believe that we really need to start by characterising our leaks. We need to consider whether or not we have natural leakage, which may be playing a part, and how does this impact the isolation strategy when we know we have leakage to the seabed. It's important to model our leakage and come up with deterministic and probabilistic ranges in terms of potential leakage rates, and also what percentage of that leak is actually reaching the atmosphere, because the direct atmospheric emission is actually what's impacting society and obviously the environment. I believe it would be lovely to come up with regional frameworks which compile acquired data and of course models in order to be able to guide operators in terms of their decommissioning and isolation options, in particular for shallow biogenic gas. And during phase 1 of the work breakdown structure and the project management phase, we are out in the field doing our environmental impact assessment and acquiring data to inform it. So why not leverage that particular phase of the decommissioning project to actually inform our leakage rate quantification? We do need to determine that cost benefit analysis. Calculating cost to society is one way of doing it. We need to provide a decision-making framework for risk mitigation, which is proportional to the problem. So really utilizing that ALARP principle. And in phase 3 of the work breakdown structure and the well abandonment planning and execution, we should be acquiring data potentially to support the continued use of an ALARP design. And of course, monitoring. We have a very, very minimal monitoring plan in phase 11 of the work breakdown structure when it comes to abandonment. Should we be doing more? Should we be employing the same tactics as in the carbon capture and storage space? And if we are monitoring and we see leaks, how do we intervene? Should we intervene? These are all the questions that need to be answered, but I definitely believe there is a place for monitoring when it comes to abandonment as well. So, in conclusion, all rocks leak. Leak characteristics vary. The key metric is the volume of the leak reaching the atmosphere and impacting society. Leaks can be modelled and sites can be monitored. We should be leveraging existing opportunities to gather data. The calculation of cost to society or societal cost is a valuable metric for justifying a solution which is proportional to the problem in terms of cost risk reduction. But this method requires a change of mindset and an acceptance that there is a place for pragmatism over perfection when it comes to well abandonment. That's the end of the presentation. I can't wait for the debate over this subject. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ruth. Fantastic presentation. First time I've seen it personally. I know you've presented it at various forums before. I thought it was an extremely elegant methodology that you described there with the societal cost. Bringing that in, I've not seen that before. So well done to you for coming up with that. I thought that was really interesting.
Thank you.
If I may bring in one of our panel experts here, Elvin, since you are the R&D guru on the panel here on this kind of subject. I just wondered if you might have any reflections on Ruth's presentation, particularly in relation to the work that you've been doing, and anything that struck you there in that presentation, and anything you'd like to highlight?
First of all, I agree with you. That was an excellent presentation. I agree with you that bringing up the social cost as well brings up the different perspective to see where we can accept the risk of leakage or not. And I might have a couple of comments, questions actually regarding the how do we do the abandonment in the industry. For example, while you were presenting some of the cases from the presentation, you showed that some of the cement that should cover this sand layers, which is charged with the methane, but it is not. Do they fail it? I mean, what's the reason for that? Is it like, did they just fail to detect it while they're drilling?
It's interesting.
Or...
That's a really good question, because the blowout I refer to actually changed the drilling parameters of the shallow section across the basin, in that they would use a weighted mud system and they would set surface casing to above the zone. And so, yes, they had very much subdued any gas response during the drilling of a lot of wells in the area, many tens of wells, in fact, as a result of that blowout incident. So it wasn't so much that the gas wasn't there; it was just that it was very much subdued during the drilling process. And of course, the cementing history, yeah, that's definitely one for the drillers at the time. But there is this is very common within the North Sea basin, particularly in the central North Sea, that you see this shallow biogenic gas issue, sustained annular oil casing pressure most commonly, and sampled methane at surface. But yeah, good question.
Yeah, we saw that actually during our research cruise in the North Sea this summer. We saw that some of the wells has this seepage going on near the wells, which is naturally going as well, which is in the same area. You can see the natural seepage is going on, and you see when you go to the exact well location, you can see the well is seeping as well. So my question is, do you think these wells, do they play a role like just another pathway for the gas to seep, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think what we've done is we've made a hole. We've made a hole in it. There are natural holes, obviously, but we've placed a superhighway in the way. And I know it's our responsibility as well duty holders to permanently isolate. Zero leaks forever is very much our sort of MO. But it is very challenging in particular areas like the central North Sea, and obviously the Norwegian continental shelf is just the same in terms of natural leakage and seepage. And I think there is not much cognizance given to that when it comes to the regulations legislation.
Did that answer your questions, Elvin? And they were very good questions, by the way.
Yes, and also if we can go to the slides, I might ask a couple of questions in there, if you don't mind.
Sure, yes, of course.
Well, this is the cross-examination now.
Oh no!
Yes.
You might have to. I'm only the messenger. You might have to tell me which ones, because I've got lots of animations.
And going back to offering some elements, additional elements to your question, Elvin. The industry in general is more focused on placement of cement for critical isolation. Very often it is focused on construction of wells and the safe continuation of operations, for the drilling construction. But as we learn with time, then we sometimes see that there are some formations that weren't necessarily considered capable of flow at one point, or considered necessary for isolation. But in the cementing practices that were deployed at the time, they weren't necessarily an absolute objective for isolation, which has left us exposed in some areas.
Yeah,
Which slide would you like to see?
I think it starts from the slide number 22, if I'm not mistaken, where you explain the perforate squeeze cementing.
Oh no, excuse me. Because I'm sharing my screen, it's a bit tricky. Millions of animations. 22, here we go, nearly there.
22 or 25.
What's your question whilst I'm getting there?
My question is, for example, as you mentioned, there's a strung out cement, which does not this cement sheet does not cover the biogenic gas sand.
That's right.
So does it even matter if we put the perforate wash cement and it does not cover the seal layer that seals the biogenic gas sand? If you just continue to the next slides. Yes, a couple more.
Yeah, so we've done our inflow test to see what kind of pressure we have.
Yep.
Yep.
And then comes the cement itself.
Yeah, we're trying to obviously place it in a position above the strung out cement. We're not entirely sure where this is, and therefore, that this is the best endeavors case.
Yes, I was going to come there. Wouldn't it be better to start with the cement bond logs to make sure if we have any cement in there or not, instead of just putting something blindly and hoping that it will not leak?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is very much a best endeavors case with minimal cost, I would say. Obviously, a cement bond log running it does have an additional cost, but yeah, absolutely, that would be a refinement of this operation for sure.
Actually, right now we are doing a case study on the, I think, north part of the North Sea, where we have the 100-kilometer long shallow gas anomaly, and we have the natural seepage going on, and we have some wells with the active methane seepage, and we have some wells that doesn't have any seepage or leakage around it. So we are wondering if the placement of the environmental plug, does it matter or not? And we will probably report it within a couple of months.
That's
I was wondering, Elvin, on that point, if you considered the nature of the overburdened shales above the biogenic gas sand. You may have called in to the presentation from Eric Van Oort a few months back that we had here on the SP P&A technical section, and his work in identifying these reactive shales, creep-prone shales, that actually, had we not cemented past them or attempted to cement past them during the time of well construction, we may very well have ended up with a better natural well barrier than with cement. Yeah. So yes, indeed, cement isn't always our friend. As Ruth mentioned, strung out cement, etc. I'm not sure I've ever pumped a perfect. Well, I've never pumped a good cement job. Probably they've all probably in some way or another been contaminated or suffered along the way. So so maybe there's some link there. I don't know about your specific case that you mentioned, but
and a comment on what you mentioned, Elvin, that that shallow reservoir occurrence has been mapped and covers in a very extensive area. Okay, good. So maybe it is absolutely there. There might be some variations depending on where this was penetrated in terms of petrophysics, due to the slightly different nature of the sediments in that area. So it might look the same, from at macro level, but actually it could explain also some differences in the intensity of the leaks.
Actually, at the moment, what we see is that as you move away from the natural seeps, Usually you have this natural seal layer, very thin clay layers on top of the shallow gas anomalies, which prevents it to leak to the surface. And as we see, as we move away, in top of that, we have thickening of the overburden on top of the shallow gas, which also plays a role. In the shallow part, I mean, in near the natural seep, if you look at the seismic, you see that there is almost no overburden on top of the shallow gas anomaly, so it doesn't have any seal to prevent it to leak. But as you go to away, north, east, doesn't matter, you see that thickening of this overburden. And we're wondering if placement of environmental barrier along this seal, will it help to contain the natural shallow gas or not? Now, that's what we are going to answer, hopefully.
So I guess just to play devil's advocate there, Alvin, if there's no natural cap rock, then why isolate it at all? Yeah, I appreciate,
Exactly.
yes, Ruth gave a very elegant attempt at quantifying societal impact. And, I guess the argument is that if we try to put cement there, we're going to slow things down. But, ultimately, it's going to come out into the atmosphere at some point, right? I guess
Yes.
the whole debate around climate change is how quickly, we're contributing to the problem. It's the acceleration of it that's the issue, I guess. Yeah.
And also the impact of trying to do something.
Right,
these
exactly.
operations will, for want of a better word, shuggle the wellbore elements, the sediments, potentially liberating more biogenic gas than had maybe naturally seeped out.
Sure.
So there's this trade-off.
Absolutely, and I was very interested, Ruth, that you mentioned about, I think you assumed 90% of methane was reaching the atmosphere, and that was a conservative estimate based on the literature, the scientific literature out there. And sure, there's the gas that's reaching the atmosphere, but what about also the marine environment? Are we missing a trick there as well? I see a lot of talk, particularly for CCS projects, repurposing old fields and so on, about establishing environmental baselines. But I don't see a lot of talk about environmental thresholds. And there's a difference. There's the current status of the benthic environment, but there's also what can the benthic environment naturally handle. So in some instances, not all leaks are bad leaks. And some gas leakage could actually be beneficial in some marine environments, right? And this is an area that I know next to nothing about. But I think, Pierre-Edouard, you've been having some conversations with contacts in the Netherlands at T&O, Martin, who's going to be running the... exactly, Martin Whipshaw, that's right.
I think it's an area of ongoing research, and maybe Alvin can shed some light on this. So point taken. Some of the leaking methane might reach the atmosphere. The rest might get absorbed, dissolved. And so what is the environmental impact of this? I mean, what do we know? Is it?
I was actually going to add to the point of Alex. There is actually a newly published paper in the literature, which is assessing the possibility of gas leakage through drilling-induced fractures in shallow formations, where they try to understand how half-life of the methane on the water column and the water depth impacts how much of it will dissolve in the water and how much of it will be consumed by the microbe colonies and so on.
Yeah,
that's good to know.
I think it's a...
And the worst case scenario is around, I think, 60% of it is consumed by the microbes and the rest is diffusive outgassing to the atmosphere. But it is happening in the very shallow waters, which is around 60 meters, I think. As the water depth is increasing, let's say up to 100 meters, 150 meters, the dissolution goes up to 90, 95, even 99%.
Okay.
I mean, I would recommend to have a look at the paper. That's...
Thanks for that. Yeah, certainly. Look that
I can
up.
share the name in
I think
in the chat.
That's why it's so important to try to understand the receiving environment. And I know there have been initiatives that maybe haven't gotten off the ground so far in terms of support from operators, in terms of regional studies. So to create some of those regional frameworks to help I think there's a real reticence, because it is then accepting that, you know, what if our wells leak? And there's a few comments in the chat around, you know, regulatory piece. Are regulators sort of understanding the natural systems that we are trying to isolate, and the complexities and potential worsening of the scenarios if we're trying to in place lots and lots of barriers, particularly in the shallow zones? So there seems to be quite an interesting distribution of questions around regulations for leakage.
Yep, and just to pick up on that, I think Amara asked a question there about who remains legally responsible, and I did a quick, I have to admit, a bit of an AI search on that one, and yeah, this comes up a lot, but I've got a terrible memory. So, but under UK law, at least, Petroleum Act 1998, operators do indeed retain the residual liability for abandoned wells, and it includes responsibility for any future issues such as leakage, environmental harm, or interference with marine activities. Indeed, so yeah.
But how do we know what's leaking? Because we never go back and check.
Yes, that's
so,
right, and that connects with the first point, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
How does the legislation or the standards rather define the requirements? Well, they're pretty woolly, actually, aren't they? Around that, there isn't, as far as I know, at least in maybe Ruth, you're better versed in the UK regulations perhaps than myself.
Well, the leak risk, there is language around, you know, as low as reasonably practical, insofar as is reasonably practicable. Obviously, it pertains to not just the abandonment phase, but obviously the whole construction, operation, and then the final abandonment of wells. And yeah, that's written into the legislation. But obviously, we're very fortunate in the UK to have decommissioning guidance, which is a bit more practical in terms of you know, actually how we can set our barriers in the right place to be effective. But we are still all, of course, trying to make that leak risk zero. And I think the whole modelling piece has a real part to play in being able to quantify the effect of the chosen abandonment strategy on any potential leak risk. I think there's definitely an evolving space and requirement there. We're seeing it internationally as well. Southeast Asia, Australia in particular. There is more willingness to actually put numbers to it. But what if that number isn't zero? You know, how do you have that conversation with a regulator or with your partners?
And I think
when it comes to that.
In retrospect, I think this discussion was probably accelerated greatly by the CCS project and the probability that we might have some leaks due to the nature of corrosive fluids. But yeah, it is absolutely something that we can explore. We probably should take a look at for future programs, just like the monitoring. Also, it's going to be a journey. It's not going to be something that will be done very quickly. It's going to be, we'll have hundreds of wells to abandon in the North Sea. So what is a good approach to do that? And probably considering the duration and what we're going to learn, then yeah, maybe monitoring to make sure that we're on track, that what the choices we make are the correct ones, is probably a valuable tool, a valuable option.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've had a few good questions, and I'll show this one if it's a question. Yeah, it's a question by Jovan, fellow officer with the WITS. Do you think we'll have a more strict framework in the future, regulations and standards
for P&A? Yes, it's interesting because, for example, in the US, where there's very strict time limits, and you know, in terms of it's very much regional, but in terms of the legislation, you have to abandon your well by X date. You have to use this method, and it's an area where there are potentially tens or hundreds of thousands of wells leaking. So do you go down the very prescriptive route, which means that you, as a well operator, only do up to that operation? You don't go, it's not as bespoke as maybe we would do in the UK, and look at subsurface and engineering studies to underpin a fit for purpose design. So I think it's an interesting debate. Very prescriptive, and therefore, one size fits all and doesn't necessarily fit all, or you go for the bespoke route, which may be an ALARP design or a minimum scoping design, and what is the impact? But I personally don't see more prescription coming in the UK space. I think we're very fortunate to have a risk-based approach.
I think, though, perhaps, Ruth, with CCS in particular, there's a lot of new technology being thrown at it. It's almost an opportunity, to correct the mistakes of the past. It's a new field of endeavour for, well engineering and geologists and so on. And, with the incorporation of all of this fancy technology, DAS, DTS, tilt meters and methane sensors and CO2 sensors, etc. I think we may well see things that we didn't, realize were there, or perhaps don't want to hear about or see.
But again, what do you do with that information? What is the value of that information?
That's
how
right.
does it impact an intervention? And again, some people say, well, I just want a limit, just tell me. When I presented this at SP World Ecom in June, there was a comment afterwards saying, well, just tell me a limit, an acceptable limit. Well, I'm never going to stand up and do that, obviously.
No, and I think you've done a great job.
Boundaries.
No, but you've done a great job at stimulating the conversation, and there'll be many questions unanswered from today's session.
Try.
So we can try at least, and not everybody, or very few people, have a good understanding of the issue in its complexity. And so Elvin was providing a great perspective from his own research, which is something new. We go out there, we measure, we learn things. And I had I just saw a comment from Bhaskar Murugapan about the engineering done for that study, which I think is great. It's thought provoking, and some people are going to say, "Oh, no, this is wrong." Oh, you gave it the wrong weighing. Of course, you have to make some assumptions, and I disagree with the 30 tons. It should be 45. Whatever. It's the methodology that proves some valuable. And Bhaskar's point is that it's great if we're learning this. How does that apply to land? To land operations? Yeah.
A bit like with a cow, that's a direct emission to the atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly.
No, absolutely. And having a cognizance of the impact of direct emissions, where you don't have the beauty of having a layer of water to absorb potentially up to 99% of your methane. Is absolutely a critical point. Yeah.
No, it was a great session. I would burn to ask you, but it would maybe so very quickly. Let's not make that a complex answer. But we look at methane for composition and the modeling. But what if there were other gases? What about the sampling? Would the logic still be true if we had some thermogenic gas in there also? In the mix? Is that then?
There's always. It's never black and white, is it? Again, you'd have to be pretty sure that your source was biogenic, in terms of methane concentration. But there's always an element of uncertainty, and you'll always have that, in a way, that mixing zone throughout the overburden.
Good news is
gas signature.
Good news is we sampled like around 40 wells with the ROV, and all of them are biogenic gas.
Good.
So
brilliant. And presumably you had seismic data to back up the sort of accumulation size, which is really critical as well.
So that was all Norwegian continental shelf, was it?
Yes, for the moment, yeah.
So you're reaping the benefits of Norsok D10 there, by the sounds of it. Great.
All right.
And also we have active seepage going on, and a lot of active seepage compared to what we have associated with wells. That's another thing to look at. Also, maybe comparing active seepage to the well-associated one will help us to determine this limit that Ruth mentioned.
Yes.
What will be the acceptable leak rate?
but those tools are now available. We can apply them. It is a methodology that has been proposed very bravely by Ruth. They will be open for criticism, by immediately, of course. Yeah, exactly. But no, it's rather to consider, try to measure. So SPE, we're a society of engineers, and we want to promote science, and yeah, it is available. We can take a look at that. Yeah. So I certainly enjoyed the chat today with you, Ruth.
No, thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Excellent.
Comments from any of you? Alvin, Alex?
Thank you.
We've reached the hour, so yeah, I think it's time to
We've
close.
reached,
Fantastic.
there are a couple of other questions on the difference between option 2 and option 1. Your remedial approaches that you mentioned in the presentation. I see Edwin Damascena, who's a famous well engineer in this part of the world in Southeast Asia. But I'll take that with him offline, I think. Maybe.
Cool. I'm not a well engineer, so I defer to your superior knowledge, Alex.
Oh, no, it's okay. Yeah. Section milling certainly has a different cost profile in the North Sea region than it does certainly in this part of the world with thinner casing strings, etc. And we're now doing shorter lengths down here as well. So anyway, but I'll take that up with him offline. But no, otherwise, I think, a fantastic session. Really appreciated your words of wisdom, Ruth, and some really good discussion and debate afterwards. Thank you very much to you, Elvin, for joining us. And best of luck with your research. There's going to be some fascinating papers coming out of that for sure, no doubt. I look forward to those. And I think
some of it will also be discussed in more details at the symposium, the event in Utrecht. And if you want to find out a bit more about the zonal isolation in cement and what we know about it and what we don't know about it, and some of the tools that we use to quantify, estimate, etc., the well integrity workshop is definitely a good place to talk to the best. Yeah.
All right, great. So I guess we can probably wrap things up around about now then. So thanks again, Ruth, and to Elvin, and of course to you, Pierre-Edouard, for running the show today with your technical wizardry. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Alex, for facilitating, being a great co-host today.
No problem. My pleasure. And we hope to see you all again at one of our future webinars. So please stay tuned. Pierre-Edouard will be keeping everyone posted on what's coming next. And I guess we're going to conclude with a short video from the SPE. Is that right, Pierre-Edouard?
That is absolutely right.
You have that? Yeah.
Yep, I have it.
So why don't we roll that and say goodbye to everyone. Thanks.
All right. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
People ask me why they should join SPE, and what I tell them is that SPE is absolutely essential. Frankly, if SPE didn't exist, somebody would have to go out and create it. When you graduate with a technical degree, a petroleum engineering degree, or other engineering degree, you get a lot of really good knowledge that gets you started on your career, and you learn a lot on the job. But the jobs that we have in this industry, they're really quite difficult. And you've got to have other resources, either to solve specific problems you might be having at the moment, or to better understand how to solve, daily issues that you work on. SPE provides opportunities to learn about new things that people are working on. There are great articles in JPT magazine and the other magazines that we have that are really useful. If you're not reading JPT every month, I tell you, it's essential to do that, to keep up with the technology. We have excellent conferences where you can learn from people who have solved very difficult problems in our industry. And doing that is just incredibly important and incredibly useful. To me, I don't see how you can be an engineer working in the petroleum industry and not find value in the resources and the opportunities that SPE provides. It's an opportunity to meet people who can help you in the industry, and it's an opportunity to get the knowledge you need to be successful.